Gideon, are we good to go? We're good. Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here, and we have a lot to cover. This is a very important topic. So the topic that I'll be speaking on is on the academic strengths and weaknesses of homeschooling. So this is not our theme, but this is a homeschooling conference, and so we don't want to neglect all of this. I was born and raised in Southern California in the LA area, and I my kind of typical probably immigrant story that academics were very important in our house growing up. Both of my parents were very motivated to make a living here, came to the US with very little, and school and education are often seen by immigrants as the path to make it. And it's true. Immigrants have a lot of success in the United States, mostly because of just hard work and grit and being able to succeed academically. And so I was in public school all the way through the end of high school and had very mixed experiences. There were a lot of bad influences in the schools that I was in. There was a lot of pornography, there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of just worldly music, foolishness, friends who were not especially helpful spiritually. And and then besides all the negative influences spiritually, for me, one of the things that I look back at with a lot of regret is how I viewed my own parents, and they weren't really cool, and I didn't want to kind of hang out with them. I cared a lot more about my peers than my parents, and that led to a lot of issues. I would say pride, people pleasing, issues like that. And so the main two reasons, and I want to stress this point, even though I'm going to be start speaking on academics, the main two reasons that we chose to homeschool were wanting to protect our children from the negative influences in the school system. There's a lot of very powerful corrupting forces that are there that you may not even see until years, decades later. And then two, wanting to have closer relationships with our children and have our family be the primary set of relationships. Okay, so I hope it's clear that academics were not our driver for why we wanted to homeschool. And I would homeschool even if it meant you had worse academics. I really would. To me, it's so worth it to know that you are protecting your children. Jesus said, if you cause a little one to stumble or to sin, what did he say the consequences of that are? Anybody remember? Yeah, better have a millstone tied around your neck than to cause one of these little ones to sin. And that applies to parents and their responsibility for their children. So if you abdicate your responsibility and your child gets snared into sin, you are responsible. And Jesus said that we should take that very seriously. Okay, so that those two drivers for us, the protection of our children and then the relational ones were our drivers. All that being said, academics are still very important, especially for me. Doing well in school has been a huge gateway for my own career, my own advancement, just all kinds of opportunities that never would have been possible had it not been for doing well in school. Doing well in school opens up careers and possibilities that you just won't have unless you have done well in school. I tend to think of your academic career as like your career in miniature. If you do well in that, you probably will do well in your business or whatever the particular industry that you choose to work in. So do well there, and you will likely succeed later on in life. If you struggle there, it is likely your later career will struggle. Okay, so regarding academics and regarding speaking at any kind of homeschool conference, I think all of us have a lot of nervousness and trepidation, which is, am I qualified to speak on this? Have I proven myself? Like, should I even be up here speaking on this topic? And I stand here with a lot of humility because this I have a lot of younger children as well. But compared to 5 years ago, I can say we now have 3 children who have gone through the upper levels. They've done standardized tests, SAT, PSAT, AP exams, and they've done very, very well. So compared to a few years ago, I can now say I have a basis of confidence here that gives me some competency on this, even though I do want to speak very humbly on this. Okay, so I want to open up with a standard question that you hear a lot in homeschooling settings, which is, do homeschoolers perform better or worse than their peers, their counterparts who go to regular school, public school, private school? Okay, so that's an important question, right? And a lot of people, I've been to many homeschool conferences over the years. A lot of people will give just a really quick, yeah, they do better. And there is some evidence that they will do better on especially some standardized tests. However, so I'm trained as a scientist, and I like to kind of look under the hood and figure out, what does this actually mean? It's actually a lot more complicated than that. And in fact, the data are much more mixed in terms of how they do later on. If you're interested in talking about some of this, you can ask me later. It's a very complicated subject. We obviously don't have randomized trials. You have to make a lot of inferences from correlation. It's always dangerous here. Before I give you the more nuanced results, I have taught at 3 colleges over the years. I've taught at Sattler College, where we're at right now, for a number of years. I've taught at Harvard to undergraduates there. I've taught at a range of schools. I've taught in California. I TA'd a class out there. And I can say I've now seen literally hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 now, but definitely hundreds of students that I've had in various classroom settings. And at Sattler, we have a lot of homeschooling students here. And here's what I've learned. When I look at our top students, like top of the top students, we've gotten people from Sattler into Yale and Johns Hopkins and really, really great schools. And I look at just our top students. That top cohort is definitely enriched with homeschoolers. Okay, so there's some of our best and brightest have been homeschooled. And you might say, see, there it is, homeschoolers, they do great. It's case closed. But if I look at our bottom students who have really struggled, it's also enriched with homeschoolers. So the reality is that the homeschoolers are kind of like just all over the map. There's not the same level of standardization that happens there. And so some people are just hitting it out of the park and they will beat their peers easily, but some people have really, really struggled. Okay, so that is the sad but sober truth here. And if we unpack this even more carefully, what we find is that when you look at specifically later standardized tests, where homeschoolers tend to shine is in reading-based subjects. So English, history, those sorts of things. But they actually do worse in math and science-based standardized tests. Okay, and this is sometimes called the math gap, the quote math gap. And we'll talk about this. So far, I'm saying that homeschoolers are all over the map, doing better than their peers in reading-based subjects, but slightly worse in math and science. In addition, homeschool students tend to go to college with much less frequency than their public school or private school peers. Now, a lot of that is due to their parents and expectations that their parents have. But in general, homeschoolers don't go on to higher education at the same rate. They go on to higher education at a lower rate than their peers who go to public school or private school. So why is there this math gap? And why is there excellence on the reading side? If you're a homeschooler, you can probably answer this question because you've probably even seen it in your own children, which is that first, homeschoolers, generally speaking, have less access to television, to the internet, to phones, all those things. And they tend to turn to books as their hobby, as a general rule. And so because of that, homeschoolers tend to be more well-read, and thus their command of subjects like English and history and those sorts of things tends to be better than their public school counterparts. Okay, and probably it's the case that just because there's more and more issues with screen addiction, phone addiction, people are reading less with time, that if homeschoolers can stay as good readers, that gap will increase with time. So that's good. That's score a win there for homeschooling. However, and this is an important however, reading can become a kind of book gluttony. Okay, what do I mean by book gluttony? I mean, it's where a child reads for pleasure, but they read so much that they don't actually do the things that they're supposed to be doing, their chores, other subjects. They just read and read and read and read all day long. And it's an excessive indulgent reading. Hey, why solve a math problem and do my chores when I can read an adventure story? Right? I mean, we've probably seen that. This is a classic problem that homeschoolers have, which is something I don't want to be negative here too much, because we want to celebrate reading. We want to say we're happy that there's a great investment into reading. I'm very happy that my children love to read, but we don't want our children to be book gluttons either. Now, this problem is made even more acute. It's even more serious because homeschooling environments are often very flexible or unstructured. There's no school bus, there's no bells, often there's not due dates in the same way. And so, hey, let's just hang out, read some books, do this, just kind of go at my own pace, do that. And people can take advantage of this lack of structure, this lack of flexibility, and then become even more gluttonous and just kind of have this quite undisciplined life that can be frustrating. Parents can be extremely frustrated because, hey, Sally or Bill, go clean your room. Oh, and they're reading on their book. They're reading their book on their bed for an extra hour. Come on, go. And then you go back to their room and they're still reading. And this book gluttony can take over, and it can become very detrimental to having a successful home. So I understand why parents give up. I really do. I'm sympathetic with parents who say, I'm giving up. I'm going to send my child to school, to a public school or private school, because they're going to have structure. They're going to listen to their teacher. I just can't give them the structure that they need to have there. And so much of this is connected to discipline and order, which is the theme of this year's conference, but I'm not going to speak about that specifically in this session. I will talk about it tomorrow in a different session. But what I do want to do is I want to spend time specifically on the academic component and how can we have strong results across the board where our young people are excelling in every way. It should be the case that they are outperforming with reading, English, history, and math and science. There's no reason why that can't happen, and we'll talk about that here, about how to accomplish this. Okay, so I'm going to give some concrete points about how to do this, and give some recommendations, even a book here that I'll talk about. So first, my first overall recommendation is to emphasize the growth mindset. The growth mindset. Now, you may know that phrase. A lot of you will hopefully know that phrase. It was a phrase coined by a woman named Carol Dweck. She's a professor at Stanford. And she has studied, it's a secular book, but she has studied so many sociologic papers, thousands of individuals, and asked the question, what determines long-term success for individuals? Okay, so she's a professor at Stanford, so obviously she's working with very bright students. And what she describes is that basically there are two types of people in the world. There are people who have a growth mindset, or people who have a fixed mindset. Growth or fixed mindset. And if you can instill in your child this growth mindset, then not only will they far outperform their peers and just do really well in school, their whole lives will be successful later on. Okay, so I'm gonna spend some time talking about the growth mindset here because it's really important. And I'm going to illustrate here, this is again from Carol Dweck's work, with some contrasting statements that are playing through people's minds, through their heads. You know, we're all talking to ourselves all day long. And I'll share some examples of this. So some people will say in their mind, who have that fixed mindset, they'll say, my abilities are unchanging. They are what they are. A growth mindset person will say, challenges help me grow. Okay, so I say this at Sattler a lot. I teach in a biology class here, and we do about Algebra 2 level in order to do some thermodynamics. And there are a certain group of people who come in and they say, I'm bad at math. They just say that. They think they're bad at math. And I say, if you say that to yourself, it will be a self-reinforcing truth, where when you encounter something hard, instead of saying, I can do this, I can overcome, you're just going to say, I'm bad at math, and you're going to give up, and you're not going to be able to solve that problem because you've been defeated in your mind before you've actually begun to actually solve the problem. This is a huge difference of people who really succeed. A person who's going to succeed in school and beyond, they're going to see a problem and say, I may not know how to do it yet, but I can figure out how to do it, and I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to do my very best to overcome in order to solve this problem. A person who's got that fixed mindset, they wilt, they wither, they see something they don't know, oh, I can't do that, and they just give up. Another example of a fixed versus growth mindset is a person who has the fixed mindset will say, feedback is a criticism of my self-worth. A person who has the fixed mindset, if they get feedback, they think, oh, this is criticizing me at my core, my identity, and they tend to kind of get nervous and not enjoy feedback because they see it as criticizing their very identity. A growth mindset person says, feedback is gold. It's constructive. I can take that and become a better person as a result of that feedback. These are a couple illustrations of the fixed versus growth mindset. There's many pairs of contrasts that you can get from her book, and she's got some talks online on this. But it really begins even at the level of how you speak to your children from a very young age. Okay, so classic example of the wrong kind of speech that you should do to your child is they do well in a test. Hey, great job! You must be really smart. Okay, and you might think, like, what's wrong with that? That's like positive, right? Like you should say that. No, you should actually say something more like this. Great job. You must have worked at this. You must have put in effort. What's the difference between the two? Anybody want to take a stab at why the former? Yeah, please. Exactly. Beautiful. That's exactly right. It's actually reinforcing that fixed mindset as opposed to commending the effortful exertion there that is required. Another one here is, this is the wrong kind of praise. See, you are good at English. You got an A on your last test. As opposed to, you really studied for your English test and your improvement shows it. Another example of the wrong kind of praise. You got it. I told you you were smart. Process praise, in distinction, the growth mindset type praise is, I like the way you tried all kinds of strategies on that math problem until you finally got it. Okay, so this kind of language is language you really want to try to watch and cultivate from a very, very young age. And I'm going to now make an even bigger claim that's going to get us hopefully some conviction here, which is that the parent has to have the growth mindset. If you have a fixed mindset and you expect your children to have a growth mindset, it's not going to work. Okay, you're one of the advantages or weaknesses of homeschooling, depending on how the parent is that your child will become more like you than they would if they went off to a public school where there's just a different set of people who are going to be educating them. And so if you have a fixed mindset, it is highly likely your child will pick that up. If you have a growth mindset, it is highly likely that your child will pick that up. Okay, so I'm going to give some examples here. And I'm gonna focus in on science and math because that's, like I said, historically where homeschoolers do poorly. What is your excitement? What is your growth mindset towards algebra, towards trigonometry? Okay, do you have this sense of like, oh, I can't do that? Or do you have the sense of, I'm excited to learn this. I'm excited to learn this. And your child senses that you're excited. They see that you believe that you can learn these things and that you can overcome challenges. Or do you have this kind of like, that's just something for somebody else to learn or something along those lines? Even if you did not learn it or you don't know it yet, maybe not everybody knows algebra or trigonometry or something like that. What attitude do you have right now when I said that? Do you have the attitude of like, hey, I can do this. I'm excited to have this challenge. Or do you have this like, oh, that's something for kids or for somebody else? Your response to that is going to be a very strong predictor of how your own children will rise to the challenge or not meet the challenge. Okay? You want your children to feel, to know, to see, wow, my mom, my dad, they enjoy embracing these new challenges. Now, I am totally convinced of this, that what matters way more than the degree that you get from high school or college or whatever it is, it's more the attitude, the learning mindset, the growth that matters more than the specific piece of paper. A lot of people, if they truly examine their heart, okay, I'll let you search your own heart here. When you went to high school and you learned, again, I'll pick algebra here. When you finished that, did you say, whew, I'm so glad that's done, I get to move on? The right mentality is to say, hey, I'm so glad I learned this. I'm gonna continue to cultivate that and to use that and to become a lifelong learner. Your children will pick up your attitudes that you have towards learning. If they see and if they feel, they taste that you love to learn, that you love challenges, including science and math, that will be transmitted to them. Okay, so this is very, very, very important. It's way more important for homeschoolers to have a strong attitude about this, like I said, than somebody who sends their children off to a public or private school. The bulk of the success of a homeschool program will come from the attitude of the parents. I didn't say the children, I said the parents. And then that will be something that the children will feed off of and partake in. Okay? So I really have detected this a lot, mostly because like I said, I've taught in a lot of math and science related subjects over the years. That's most of what I've done in terms of my own teaching, is these kind of like mental blocks that people have, they are just toxic. I mean, they will really shut down your own ability to progress and grow, and then that will be transmitted to your children. Okay, so to sum up this point, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset is something that is the primary determinant of your child's academic success and their later success, starting businesses, having a career, whatever it is. That is kind of the core that matters. And that begins with you, the parent. And you can control yourself. It's much harder to control other people, but you can control yourself. And I want to encourage you to embrace these kinds of challenges here. I'll give some examples of this later on. Okay, the The next challenge that I'm going to give, the next recommendation that I'm going to give is to use standardized tests and to celebrate the work, not the results, but the work of preparing for a standardized test. Okay, so I'm going to speak primarily to the US system here. It's probably similar in Canada. I'm not completely sure, or Australia, but I know the US system since that's what I was raised in. Especially once you get to ninth grade, even if you're a homeschooler, there is a world of opportunities that are free that you should be preparing your child for. One of the first is they're called AP tests. AP stands for Advanced Placement. So AP tests are nationally standardized tests that you can do starting in usually 10th grade, but even in ninth, you can start with them. Here's some of the subjects: English, math. Math, they have pre-calculus, statistics, calculus. Science, they have biology, chemistry, physics. They have history, they have social sciences, they have Spanish, they have French, they have Chinese. There's a variety of these AP tests, and especially if you live in Boston, you just call up your local school and you say, I have a child and I want them to take AP exam such and such, and they'll give you the date. It doesn't cost you anything, and they will take these. They are hard tests. They are not easy tests, and that child will get a score between 1 to 5. 3 is considered passing, 4 is considered very good, 5 is stellar, 1 and 2 are not considered passing. And you start off that year saying, hey, son, hey, daughter, as we do this, the capstone here is going to be, you're going to go take this AP test at this local school. We live in Medford here, so it's very easy for us to just do it at the Medford High School. And I was just talking to my son earlier this morning about preparing for an AP test. There are supplementary books that you should do if they want to really prepare well for those. It's a lot of work. Of course, they're learning most of it in the course of the studying for the class. But I love the fact that at the end of it, there's a benchmark, there's a deadline. They're sitting in a classroom with, number 2 pencils and a timer and all those kinds of things, right? These are great skills that homeschoolers should have. And I'm going to encourage you to really be pressing into this. And so in our family, we do a lot of celebration-based events. A lot of how we structure our home is based on, like, if we aim for a goal, we use carrots, we use goals and rewards there. And I can remember we've had 3 who have gone through these AP tests, and I'll take them out and, hey, you did so well. And there's certain restaurants and certain things. The best bagel place in Boston, if you want, I'll tell you what it is afterwards. 2 of mine just did the PSAT. They did well. And I was like, we're going to go out, just the 2 of us, and we're going to have the best bagels in Boston and celebrate there and high five and just do lots and lots of celebrating around what this is. A lot of people have the mindset that tests are negative. Tests are kind of the equivalent of feedback, right? So remember I told you about this growth versus fixed mindset, and how the person with the fixed mindset, they view a test as this, like, oh, it's a drag, it's got a criticism of me, it's like all this thing. And what you should be saying is that a test is actually an opportunity to get feedback, to grow. We have a couple people in the room who've had me for classes here at Sattler, and I give a quiz every single day in my class, in most of my classes, because I want people to learn to love the experience of getting constant feedback on that. Okay, so use standardized tests. Being a homeschooler I don't think it should mean that you just sort of like do whatever you want. There's no schedules, there's none of this. Like, no, like we're part of a bigger world where there's certain things that we should be learning. And when you get out into the real world, you're competing with everybody else out there. And are you going to learn the skills now on what it is to be excellent, to push yourself? Okay, I think you should. So that's my second point, is utilizing standardized tests and celebrating the results. The ones that I will again highlight are the AP tests. There's a lot of those. Have your children take the PSAT when they're in 10th or 11th grade, and have them take either the SAT, ACT, or the CLT when they're a senior. And that constant stream of taking real tests are usually 2 hours. Some of them are 4 hours, but it's good, right? Like learning how to do that. When I was I'm a physician. When I took the boards, step one of the boards was a 12-hour test. Like these are long tests, right? And you got to have like stamina, and you got to be ready, right? Like, and you can't expect somebody to go from nothing to that unless they've been building up to that. Okay, my next consideration or recommendation is to consider selectively, not entirely, but selectively using online classes. So we have done this in our own journey, where starting in junior high and in high school, especially for certain subjects, it really does lend itself well to some online structure there. Now, I don't like the idea of doing all online because looking at your laptop all day is just, that's not really healthy, and I think you should be not doing that. But with selective courses, I think it's great. And I will especially say science, math, those kinds of subjects, it can be very useful. I'm not going to go through the specifics here, but my wife, Laura, who's sitting right here, or myself, I would love to tell you about some of the specific tools and courses that we've used from our own experiences on how to do this well. So you can talk to us about that. But it is really helpful to be able to do that. You learn about deadlines. You learn about being on time. You learn about getting a penalty if you're late. You learn about engaging in structured systems. Now, I don't think this means that you just take your hands off the wheel and you just give it all to somebody else and let them handle it. You should still, okay, how did you do on this test? What's going on? What are you learning? Let's review. I was talking to one of my sons who's doing an online chemistry course. I was talking yesterday and today about some concepts from chemistry that he asked me about that I think are important to know. Be engaged. You still are like the principal of your school, even if they're taking an online class. You want to be very, very involved in that whole process. Now, because homeschoolers naturally are going to probably do really well on their own with English and history and those kinds of things, it's less pressing maybe that they do online for that, although there are good options even for that. Other subjects and topics that can be good for online, we had 2 of our children take a debate class, and that worked really well to do online. You can't really have debate across years within one home really well. It doesn't work. You can't have like your 16-year-old debating your 12-year-old. It's probably not going to be the best setup there. And so you want them to be all roughly the same age and roughly the same ability. Debate is a good class where they're going to learn how to prepare talks, how to gain confidence in speaking, how to formulate arguments, how to refute arguments, those kinds of things. So even though I'm a very committed homeschooler, I do think that there is a good role for online classes. And again, we can give you our own recommendations. I've done a lot of research on this, and we've used them ourselves. Okay, next recommendation I'm going to give, and this is going to tie back in with the first one, is for how to remedy this math gap that we see here. So parents, this includes mothers and fathers, take the lead in modeling a love for science and math. Okay, take the lead in modeling a love for science and math. Okay, so I told you before, if you have a fixed mindset, it is highly likely you will give that to your child. Okay, if you are a homeschooler. Children will learn from your example as much as anything. And I'm going to give just a little example of this from just this past week. Okay, so some of us got flu shots in our house. And one of the things that I think is good to do, it's good to do in general, when you get any kind of medicine, whatever it is, you can get a package insert. Okay, the package insert is usually what people just throw away. And if you'll notice, like the nurse or whoever the tech is, they'll open up the box and there'll be a little slip of paper. It almost looks like an owner's manual. It's got really small print, and people just tend to pitch it into the garbage. And I just think, like, don't pitch that into the garbage. There's gold in that. Like, that is really important to look at. And so I asked the pharmacist. I said, hey, I want a copy of the package insert. Okay, nobody ever asked for this. So they're like, why do you want this? I want it. Okay, so get it, take it home. We're going to read this and we're going to learn. Okay, so what is actually in this that you're putting in? What are the side effects? What are the clinical trials? What does trivalent mean? What does tetravalent mean? And I posed to one of my older ones who's not here at the moment. I said, there's a specific question which I want you to be able to answer based on comparing this particular package insert there. Most people are kind of like they just put their head in the sand. They don't really trust, or they over trust. They don't ask questions. They don't think about this. And you should be way more curious and say like, hey, let's ask, like, what does all this mean and what's going on here? That's one example. If the child is in chemistry, what's the molecular structure of what it is that you're learning? What it is that you're taking? Why is it that? What's the protein target? What's it binding to? Asking simple questions is a great way to provoke that. Now, again, a lot of people have a block. They have a block and they think like, structure, I don't know what a structure is. What's a hydroxyl group? What's an ester? I don't know. Guess what? You model how to learn that. We live in the golden age where it is so easy to learn these things today, just with 5 seconds of typing it in on your device, and you can understand all that. If you are you have the mental block there, it's gonna be passed down to your children. Now, we live in a particularly urgent time because there is so much confusion and misinformation about especially science and math out there. Now, I hope a lot of you know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. If you don't, I'll just quickly explain it. The Dunning-Kruger effect is something that especially afflicts the Christian populations, sad to say. What is it? So Dunning-Kruger is the following effect. So there was this individual many, many years ago who noted that there's this really interesting effect that lemon juice has. I don't know how many of you did this, but when I was young, I have one younger brother. He and I would get lemon juice, and we would get a toothpick, and we would write a message on a piece of paper with lemon juice. And you can't actually see it unless you hold it up to just the right shade of light. And so it's kind of a way you can pass secret messages using lemon juice. Anybody do this? Oh yeah, all right. A few people have done it. Only a couple. Wow. It was fun. And so this individual decided he wanted to rob a bank. And what he did was he said, well, if I put lemon juice on my face, I'll be invisible. And so I'm going to rob a bank because nobody will see me because I'm covered with this lemon juice. And so, of course, he was caught. And this attracted the attention of sociologists and scientists. And they thought, how could somebody do something so foolish where they thought that putting lemon juice over their face would make them invisible? Two scientists, Dunning and Kruger, studied this. And lo and behold, they discovered this really interesting phenomenon, which is that the less someone knows about a subject, the more confident they are about the subject. Doesn't make any sense, but that's been proven time and time again. So the less you know about a subject, the more confident somebody will be about it. So the less somebody knows about serology or CD4 cells or B cells, the more confident they'll be about a vaccine, even though they don't know anything about immunology. The less somebody knows about physics or astronomy or anything like that, the more confident they'll be about the moon or the earth is flat or something like that. It always goes in this direction, that the less you've studied something, the more confident you are about it. And we are in an age where, because people are applying themselves less and less, because there's more and more, I'll call it intellectual laziness, people aren't actually reading primary sources. The Dunning-Kruger effect is really spreading like wildfire. And unfortunately, this is why we have a lot of the social media wars and things like that, because very, very few people bother to do these things. One of the best things that you should be doing is teaching your children to say, you know what, this is God's amazing world that we live in, and we can understand it. And this is one of the main things that we're going to be doing in our own education. I'll read you a quote here from an author. His name is Randy Newman. He says this: Christians should love science. How could we, who love the maker of the heavens and the earth, not celebrate the systematic, diligent, communal investigation of the world God made. There is something very healthy, very right about loving the works of God. Everyone should love, to some degree, science and math because it's God's art. It's God's handiwork. That's how he made the world. People today think of science, oh, that's something that immigrants do who come here on an H-1B visa, or that's something that nerds do. It's like, no, like this is something that should be part of being a joyful Christian. It will make you a better thinker. It will make you to be a kind of a person who will improve all of the things that you do. Psalm chapter 111, verse 2 says, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them." Isn't that interesting? It's this kind of celebrating the works of God. And again, it's so sad. I think it's one of the great tragedies of our world that people have sort of checked out of this and have that fixed mindset and just say like, oh, that's for somebody else, that's for some, and have lost that childlike wonder. As homeschooling moms, when you come to topics like algebra, trigonometry, you can do it. You really can. Do you have the growth mindset? You can embrace these things. You know, I love doing questions like, okay, so like here we are way up high, you know, like you should be able to say like, okay, I can be able to use simple trigonometry to say, estimate how tall this building is. You should be able to do that, or a tree or something like that, right? These are things that high schoolers do all over the country. And it's kind of part of the baseline acceptance about what competency looks like in our world today. Don't be afraid to do that and let your children see that infectious joy. Another related practice that I would encourage you to do, we use a particular journal called the Core Discipleship Journal, which I have a copy of in my backpack. But every day to think of something to be grateful for and have one of those things be related to something in the created world. I wrote about this morning in my own journal. Actually, before I say this, the time I've worshiped the most in my whole life, bar none, by a mile, is when I was in medical school and I was taking an immunology class. And I couldn't believe how amazing the design was of our immune systems. You know, we are constantly bombarded. As we're speaking right now, we are bombarded with bacteria and viruses. And the vast majority of those get shut down by your immune system. And it's a beautiful discipline that most people don't take. And I often will write in my journal, wow, I am so thankful for my cytokines. I am so thankful for my CD4 helper T cells. You may not be that level of technical, but when you come to your scientific studies, I would hope that your children would just be entranced with the created world and thus the creator because of your own love for what you see and what we have been given. All of us have been given. Even something as simple as just being grateful for your heart beating. I mean, something so small as that is a great thing to be doing. Science, math, again, this is God's work. This is God's creative work more than human art. This is truly the divine. Okay, I did want to leave some time for questions, so I'm just going to be wrapping up here. So to summarize where we're at, I told you that we homeschooled not for academic reasons, but for spiritual reasons and for relational reasons. However, we wanted, and I think now have shown, that our children can do as well or better as those in the public school or the private schools. And so we don't need to have this be an either or, a false dichotomy there. We talked about the importance of the growth mindset and how that has to be starting with you, the parent, okay? If you're complaining, oh, they're not learning, they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that, then, well, what about you? What about you? Are you stepping up? Do they see you as a person who loves to learn, loves to engage, is constantly growing in those ways? Like we talked about different ways of praising and speaking to that. We talked about using standardized tests as homeschoolers and celebrating the effort that they put in. Talked about the selective use of online classes, and then we as parents modeling, particularly where homeschooling classically is weak, which is science and math, knowing that this is God's created world and that we can have, all of us can have a greater appreciation of that through our studies. I'm very thankful, I'll just wrap up by saying, I'm very thankful that we have homeschooled because in a lot of ways you get to go through school again. You get to go through, because like the first time around, you're so young, right? And you don't often even appreciate all the things that were taught to you. But when you get to go through it again a second time, you think like, wow, it's actually like even better the second time around, and I get to learn it more and understand it better. And so what a huge opportunity it is that even exposes holes that you might have. I get tickled sometimes because my children will ask questions and they'll make me realize like, wow, I have a lot of holes in my own education. I remember once I came home and a child asked me, it's like, Dad, I need to know some, tell me some facts. This is what it was. He said, tell me some facts about South Africa. And I thought, oh man, like I can maybe talk for 10 seconds, but like I don't think I'm going to do very well to tell you some facts about South Africa. But I know some of the legacy of apartheid and things like that. But I thought that's kind of a big hole I have. I don't know anything about the history of South Africa. So I decided, hey, I'm going to go learn about this and try to understand this. There are lots and lots and lots of places where we can be learning and growing there. And thus, I think homeschooling parents should be some of the best educated people on the planet because we get to go through multiple times from multiple perspectives and learn and grow in history and English and science and math and all these different subjects. All right, so I've got, I went a couple minutes over, but we have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any, and then we'll break for lunch. Yes?
A perfectionism personality trait.
Yeah.
I know that I have it. I wish I was trained out of it when she was this age, but so I'm working on that.
Yeah.
And that definitely, as you're talking through, that lends to a more fixed attitude about
Yeah.
oneself.
Right.
And especially when it comes to feedback. So any tips and tricks
Yeah,
for working through
that's a really thanks for the honest question there. That's a big one. So the way that I sometimes start is that when you think about, say, getting a grade or getting feedback or something like that, that those of us who struggle with perfectionism will be challenged with, is I say, think about it more like your fuel gauge on your car. So when you have your fuel gauge, you don't look at it when it's empty and you're like, bad fuel gauge, what's wrong with you, fuel gauge? You're like, no, it's telling me I'm empty. And in the same way, when a child gets a grade, they should think about it as this fuel gauge. And if it's a C, they're maybe closer to empty. If it's an A, they're closer to full. But we need to abstract away the value judgments that come from grades. Because I think a lot of us can take a grade and take that as like who you are. And I think especially the perfectionist person tends to be on that side of things, where what we need to do is instead say, you are secure, your identity is one of being loved by God. Nothing will change that. No matter how good or badly you do, you are loved by God, by us. What we're trying to do now is simply to fulfill the potential that you have, and let's try to take steps where it's less of an identity question. Because I think in general perfectionism, and I relate to this as well myself, so I'm very sympathetic. But I think a lot of us who are perfectionistic, the error that we can fall into is one where we are, attributing personal value and personal worth to things where it shouldn't be done in that way. And so it really does require kind of a reformulation and a rethinking of how we even think about grades. Great question. Yeah, Alyssa?
Do you do it in the younger grades also?
Yeah, Laura, do you want to address that and how we've done that?
Yeah, we haven't done in the lower grades yet, but I was wondering, and was listening, like maybe it would be a good idea. I mean, I definitely
Yeah, I mean the we so yeah we haven't the one thing that we have done and we can share some of our specifics on this is we have used so we use Saxon for math and even though it's not a standardized test, we do use an online grading system. So each child fills out their answers there, and so there is a little bit of kind of yeah. Yeah, there's tests. Yeah, that's there's tests, and they can see how they do and all that. So I think those are maybe good baby steps. But yeah, for us at least, it hasn't really started much until I would say ninth grade. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, one small note, AP tests are not actually free. They're $99.
Oh, sorry,
Actually, but
$99.
you can
Sorry.
actually